What's up, guys? Welcome to Metal Vibes, and today we are going to be ranking the albums of the Australian black death metal band Denouncement Pyre. A couple weeks back, I finally got my Denouncement Pyre t-shirt pre-order in the mail, which I was very happy by, so the band has been on my mind, so I thought it'd be cool to talk about their short, albeit very interesting, discography. For some quick background for those who aren't aware of Denouncement Pyre, they formed in 2003. They had a couple members leave over the years, leaving Paul Lang as their sole constant member. Paul also goes by the name Decay Lust, or D, depending on the album. The band would debut in 2010 with the album World Cremation. I kind of consider this a D solo album. He did the vocals, bass, and guitars on here. Now, he did have a session drummer, Inviton, who also performs in Cauldron Black Ram and Stargazer, which are also pretty renowned Australian bands. Sound-wise, this definitely leans a lot more towards the black metal side of the Black Death spectrum. You do have some deeper vocals at times and a couple heavier riffs that do suggest a little bit of death metal influence, however. It also, despite the fact that it does lean more towards the black metal side, it's a bit of a different strain of black metal than you'd hear from Scandinavia. This to me just has a really warm sound. The guitars are really dry, really scorched, not chilly whatsoever. It's very fitting for music that comes from Australia, which obviously has a lot of desert, is a pretty arid continent overall. The overall sound just kind of reminds me of Gospel of the Horns or Nocturnal Graves, but with less thrash influence. And as a big fan of those bands, this type of music is right up my alley. D generally uses these demonic raspy vocals that I really like, and there's obviously a lot of blast beats here with it being primarily a black metal album. World Cremation is certainly not a revolutionary album, but I think it's got some cool songwriting that manages to keep things interesting. I think you hear that right from the opening track, Black Womb of Magdalene, where you just have these really chunky rhythmic breaks that occur midway through and then near the end of the song that just make you bang your head. It's a really nice counterpoint to the more traditional black metal ideas you hear elsewhere in the song. Purification is also a neat change of pace. It's got a little bit of a slower tempo to it, some deeper vocals, but then it accelerates into a quicker pace later in the song with a really neat stomping rhythm near the end. Engulfed Temples is another track that really stands out to me. It's got some clever songwriting with the way it plays a riff and then shifts the drum beat entirely under the riff, which makes the riff itself just sound so much more epic, even though the guitars are playing the same thing. It's just little touches like that I think really make this album interesting. I think the way the tracks are arranged and just the way the whole album is put together just makes it work so well for me. There's only a few riffs per track, but that's really all you need. A lot of care really went into the construction of this album. For example, the extended fade out in the second to last track, A Banner Drenched in Blood, just sets things up perfectly for the grandiose closer, Invenation of Poison. This is an album that to me just does nothing wrong. I can't say it's amazing. There's not really a lot of riffs or songs that just blow me away, but it's just a really good, solid album. It's 36 minutes long. Every song generally stays around the 4-minute mark. When I put this on, I know I'm going to get exactly what I want. And nothing is going to annoy me. It's not an album you listen to and you say, oh, the vocals kind of bother me, the drumming kind of bothers me a little, the production kind of bothers me. Everything just works really well here. Even if it isn't, say, like album of the year material, it's something I love listening to, that I love returning to. And because of that, I have to put it right in the second spot in their discography. The band would return in 2013 with the album Almighty Arcanum. This to me was a great evolution. The band is not a solo project anymore on this album. They have a full-time drummer and bassist now, and the riffs here are much more interesting, and the songwriting is just much more interesting as well. You hear that right from the first proper track, An Extension of the Void. This song is just a medley of cool riffs. It's got a 7.5-minute runtime, and the second half of the song is basically just this extended atmospheric section where you have this hypnotic riff and some really great drumming below it. The whole song just feels more developed than anything off the previous album, and it's a bold way to start the album. There's not many risks taken on the prior album, I would say. It's good, it's solid, but it's not an album that I would say steps far out of its comfort zone. But here, I think it was definitely a risk making this the first proper track, but I think it pays off. He Who Conquers All is another song that stands out to me. It's got some clean picking to start before breaking into these mid-paced churning riffs that just makes it sound like you're in the middle of a hurricane. And then it's got some real cool call and response moments going on where you have guttural vocals going release, release, and then raspy vocals just following that up with other lyrics like release your fucking spirit. It's a really cool song. Everything here just flows together really well. The songs are constructed really well. The songs are arranged really well. And amidst the more intricate songwriting, you still have some straightforward moments that really work well. The title track, for example, has some black thrash style riffs that I just love. And Circle of Serpents has a really cool vocal hook where you just have the words, "It is I," repeated frequently, which just really draws me in. The sound here, in terms of the production, is more rich. It's a little less hot and dry, but there's just a little more depth to everything. I feel like there's a bit more atmosphere here as a result, and a very unsettling atmosphere at that, which I think stems a lot from the songwriting, but also from the production. The drums have a nice clear sound to them. I really like the way the drums sound. Yeah, overall, Almighty Arcanum is just a fantastic extreme metal album. There's a lot of songs I love, even ones that I haven't mentioned yet. The Deceiver is a really cool song. The closing track, The Redeemer, also has some riffs I really like. Some really neat ideas there that close out the album in fine fashion. Yeah, to me, Almighty Arcanum is just a triumph. Even as someone that enjoys the first album, this is a huge step up. I love this album and definitely ranks as my favorite Denouncement Pyre album. An easy recommendation for any fan of extreme metal. Alright, the band would follow up Almighty Arcanum with the album Black Sun Unbound, which came out in 2016. There were no lineup changes here, but there was definitely a sonic evolution. But unlike the last album, I'm not sure the sonic evolution that took place here entirely worked. This is a much more grand album, I would say, than the first album, and even than Almighty Arcanum. It feels like they went into this record dead set on making their magnum opus. There's a lot of riffs in each track, and a lot of tempo shifts, and a lot of just different ideas that you hadn't heard on their prior albums. There's some more melodic moments, a lot more clean picking. You have a couple instrumental songs, and some off-kilter riffs, like in the title track. It's also got a 49-minute runtime, so it just feels longer, it feels bigger. It makes for an interesting album, but I think the problem is things just shift around too much. There is some very jerky songwriting here. You hear that right from the first proper track, Deathless Dreaming. This song is only 3 minutes long, but there's just some random pauses, a lot of tempo shifts, a lot of riffs just coming at you that makes the song just not feel coherent. It feels like a composition that's just fighting against itself. I have the same issue with World Encircler and Wounds of Golgotha. The drumming on these tracks just feels a little too busy. It feels like it's constantly shifting, and it never really locks into a cool idea for long enough for me to enjoy it. It's just hard to enjoy some of the songs when you know that the rhythm is just going to change and the momentum is just going to get killed in, just a few seconds. It really makes me miss the first album where everything was simple, but, it worked. And it makes me miss Almighty Arcanum too, where everything just flowed together really well. That being said, there is some stuff I definitely enjoy here. The production on this album, I think, is fantastic. The guitars have some really nice crunch to them, and there are some really cool songs here. Revere the Pyre is an awesome song that actually feels really coherent in comparison to some of the other tracks here. It's got this marching rhythm and this really triumphant feel, some call and response vocals, and then this riff near the end that I just love, where it's just like, boom, but cooler than I just made it sound, probably. Scars Adorn the Whore in Red is another song I really like. There's some really manic riffs on here, some more epic riffs, and it does feel a little bit random, but it makes more sense than most of the other songs here, and I love that swirling melody that just kind of closes things out. It ultimately makes for a really cool track. There's a lot of grand ideas here. There's a lot of really good riffs. If you just blew this album apart and completely deconstructed it, the riffs you would have would probably be a better collection of riffs than anything from any other albums, but the way they're put together just doesn't quite work for me. After I listen to Black Sun Unbound, I just want to put on like a Dark Funeral album or something where it's just blast beats and I don't have to worry about tempo shifts or weird songwriting or anything like that. There's a lot of people that really like this album, and I can definitely understand why. It's very epic, it's very big, it's very grandiose, a lot of effort clearly went into it. But for me, I just can't get into it, and this is my least favorite Denouncement Pyre album as a result. Alright, and that brings us to their newest album, 2022's Forever Burning. So they got a new label with this album. They signed to Agonia Records for this one, whereas they were previously on Hell's Headbangers. And this is a decent album overall, kind of similar to the last album in terms of the eclectic riffing, but less jerky songwriting here, and some really good direct moments as well. The opening track, Forever Burning, I really like a lot. It's kind of got a rough verse-chorus structure, which is a welcome change from some of the weirder songwriting from the previous album. After some squealing tremolos, it breaks into this really crunchy thrash riff that is probably the catchiest moment they've ever had. I love it. Hung Like Swine is another neat track. It's got another thrashy section in its midsection, and even though the main riff kind of reminds me a little too much of Rise of the Predator by Destroyer 666, it's different enough that I still enjoy the song overall. Yeah, this is another diverse album too. Burn This World and Start Again is a cool song. It's got a bit of a slower pace, kind of similar triumphant vibes as Revere the Pyre from the previous album. It's a little bit long, but an enjoyable song nonetheless. That being said, I do have a couple quibbles with this album. There's a lot of cool songs here, but they just don't always do a whole lot for me. The Liberating Fires of Moloch is a neat track. It's an assortment of some really cool riffs. It's got some nice peppy stomps near the end, but overall, I'm just not blown away by it. Listening to it, I just kind of prefer, what was going on Almighty Arcanum and what was going on World Cremation. Tongue Stretch for Salvation and Darkness in the Eyes of Apophis. Again, both cool songs, both enjoyable tracks. Nothing bad to say about them, but they just really don't blow me away. On top of that, the production on this album is probably my least favorite production job they've had. The overall sound, especially guitars, is just a little mushy. The snare kind of sounds a little tinny to me. It's kind of a strange production job. I wouldn't call this a bad production, but I definitely prefer the production on their first two albums. And, overall, this isn't a bad album. I enjoy it. It's really well-rounded. It's well put together. It's got some epic moments, some cool riffs, some thrashier moments, which I like. But, it does really make me wonder if the band is ever going to top the first two albums, which obviously are my favorite. It doesn't annoy me like the last album did with those rhythmic shifts, and it doesn't feel overly ambitious like the last album did. So because of that, I'll rank it above Black Sun Unbound. But to me, there definitely is a pretty big difference in terms of my enjoyment between the first two albums and the latest two albums. I'm still curious to hear what they do. I still really like the band. I think they got some cool ideas. I think they have a cool sound. So we will see what Denouncement Pyre does from here. But that does it for this video, guys. If you like this video, please subscribe. Please drop me a like. And if you want to see me talk about more black and death metal, check out this video here where I rank the albums of the Polish black and death metal band Azarath. But that's all for now. I will see you guys next time. Stay heavy.